I'm Veronika Gallyas, the president of the Hungarian Juggling Association and coordinator of the 3C project. And this webinar is a part of this international project. 3C is standing for 3 words: circus, competencies, and catalog. And also it refers to 3 partners. We created this international collaboration as the Hungarian Juggling Association, Circuito Stabile from Italy, and Cirkeon from Czech Republic. 3C project is an Erasmus Plus project financed by the European Union. So on this way, I really would love to thank them that they invest in circus, they invest in our knowledge, and that they support our work. We invite you also to look for more content on the Facebook page, which is Facebook 3C Circus. And you can find information about the different books and courses we create in these 2 years, also videos and other pedagogic tools for circus teaching. It is also important information that it's for the near future, because we are heading the end of this 2 years long project. And we are organizing many events, both online and hopefully personal, in May, June, and July in the digital world, and also in Italy, Czech Republic, and Hungary, where we actually would love to show to as many people as possible the results of the 3C project. So that is my introduction. Thanks a lot for being with us. And now I would love to give the words to Craig. And thanks a lot, Craig, for being with us and being the part of the 3C project. And the floor is yours.
I am in Argentina. It's been really nice here, but it's starting to get cold. And I'm assuming most of you guys are in the Northern Hemisphere, so it's probably getting warmer where you are. Thank you. That's the reality. Thank you for the introduction, Veronika. Thanks everyone for being here today. It's a pretty big group, 40 people, something, no? That's pretty awesome. There's a couple updates to give you guys today. It's World Circus Day, and we're hosting this seminar or this webinar, but also we published the Spanish version of the Functional Juggling book today, Maravilloso Funcional. So this wasn't part of the 3C project outcome goals, but because the way we operate our projects, very open source and collectively, we were able to get a really talented community of translators together, and they worked really hard on the translation. And it was a difficult process because so much of the language that's in the book is sort of created by me. So trying to find ways to translate that was a process, but that's available today as well. And then another cool thing that happened today, if you live in the United States, I'm testing out a project where I want to find ways for the book to benefit local circus communities. So there is a circus school, a social circus project in the United States called Circus Harmony, and they are now selling hard copy versions of the Functional Juggling book. So if you wanted to purchase it from them, you could, and it would support them, or you're also welcome to print it at home yourself. Just some updates for you guys. And what is the other thing? I'm doing a lot of seminars right now, a lot of them online seminars. And some of you guys who are here are in those. I see a few of my students now. So it's nice to have you guys here to see that you're so enthusiastic about it. The goal with these seminars is I want to be able to create a version, a final product that I can share with everyone that will again complement the book. And I hope to have that out around August. So the people who are participating in these seminars with me now are really helping with that process. And yeah, I look forward to sharing more things with you guys. Whew. Today's class, is not going to be interactive. The online classes that I've been given have been more interactive. I'm finding ways still to make these things interesting. But for today, the goal is going to be to give an overview. So I can actually start the PowerPoint now. Let me do my screen share. We get right into it. Thank you guys for being here. Okay, so today's presentation is going to be on the topic of applied transformations and accessible juggling for everyone. So if you were able to be here for the last two presentations, those were sort of more like we went into the details of some of the theories. But in this presentation, what we're going to do is do an overview of all of them, because the theory itself is sort of holistic or cumulative. Like it's a bunch of ideas that we group together to come out with a solution, right? So the best way to learn about these things is, you know, in the way that it's laid out in the book, sort of in more detail. But today's goal is to give an overview of that, because we want to talk about the implications of it. So for those of you who weren't here for the last two classes, I'm going to go pretty quickly through the beginning material, the theory parts. And so don't nobody be worried if you're just like way over your head and like, why didn't he spend more time talking about that? It's in the book. This is just to give an overview so we can talk about what is the implications of this new material. We want to thank 3C Circus Competency Catalog for supporting this project. They sponsored the writing process of the book, and they kept me alive during quarantine because it was through that project that I was able to survive here in Argentina without any work. And I also want to thank Erasmus Plus as well for supporting them and allowing them to support me. Cool. So today's topics, as I said, it's going to be an overview of the primary concepts related to functional juggling and Quat Props methodology thus far. So in terms of what we've covered so far in the last two presentations. So if you didn't see them too, you can go back and review, or yeah, hopefully we'll get to meet up someday and I can explain it to you in person. So that's going to be the first part, a lot of theory. Again, don't worry, it's going to be fast. It's not for training purposes, it's just to give you these ideas. Observation and explanation of the primary composition. So this is one thing we didn't introduce yet, but the primary composition is like one of the key training tools we have in like the Quat Props methodology or the Quat Props tool belt. And essentially it's a choreographed development strategy, which is intended to be delivered non-verbally and without pause. So it's really facilitating a dance. And this is when we do the training seminars in person, where we spend a lot of our time because it's a sensory facilitation technique that we're using. We're learning to really maximize the nonverbal communication potentials. And in order to do that, we have to construct rhythm with our participants. And this is where the primary composition comes into play. And we learned about Propswap notation in the last class. And we use the Propswap notation to describe the composition of the primary composition, the choreography of the primary composition. We're going to talk about functional integration of non-juggling ideas. So having this system of play now, we're going to look at how we can replace different movements and different actions, because we're not describing juggling by its action. We're able to decide for ourselves what actions we want it to be. And we're going to look at how we can use that connection to create more clinical and therapeutic applications. We're going to talk a little bit about static versus dynamic interaction. So in the formula that we have for juggling, which is a managed anti-entropic sequence of orbital events harmonized by space and time, the first three parts of this equation are sort of universal to many disciplines. But the last component of harmonized by space and time is what makes juggling juggling. It's the sensory relationship that we form through this activity. And we're going to look at that part of it and how we can interact with things that are in motion and things that are not in motion, and how that changes the experience for us. We're going to talk about the implications of accessibility. So now that juggling is accessible for everyone, what does that mean for us, and where should we be looking next? And then we're going to end with a little bit of personal background about me as the creator. And I want to give you information about where the project's at and where it's trying to go in the future and how you can get involved. Cool. Sound good? Nice. Let's do it. Okay, so this is going to be our crash course section of functional juggling, or Quat Props methodologies. So we start off with what is the meaning of juggling, and we understand that if we define juggling by its action, that we're always going to alienate somebody. So if we want to make it accessible for everyone, we have to find a way to understand it that is not related to its mechanics. And I came up with this solution, which is a managed anti-entropic sequence of orbital events harmonized by space and time. If you haven't seen it before, it's not going to make sense. but it basically means that there's 4 parts to creating the experience of juggling. 1, it has to be experienced. 2, it's a pattern of events that repeats. 3, the events that we use to create it are orbital, meaning they also repeat. And 4, there has to be a sensory relationship that causes us to harmonize with spatial information. It makes more sense as we go on through it, but this is the foundation by which we start. So we deconstruct this idea of action, and we start off with this idea of relationships. Part of that process causes us to make a division between the expression and the experience of an activity. And this applies to everything, not just juggling. There's always going to be a way to express something, and there's always going to be a way to experience it as well. The expression of something doesn't relate to its experience. An expression can be transformed, but an experience cannot, because an experience relates to the relationship between the expressions. And this is one of the way that we're able to just like cut through the debate, cut through the argument about juggling, because there's a lot of debate about juggling and what its meaning is, or what it represents. So I think making this division allows us to sort of simplify that conversation. And it opens up the possibility to let other people interpret the idea. It's important. So if we look to understand juggling as its experience, we also want to understand what that experience is. So if the first part is the formula to trigger the experience, we want to have a conversation about what we understand that experience to be. And for me, it's global activation. And global activation is a unique state of mind, which is determined by its hyper yet fluid states of communication and what we recognize juggling to stimulate. So we observe that when people engage in the activity of juggling, that their brains behave in a very similar way to someone who's playing a musical instrument or someone who is experiencing flow. And we refer to this type of stimulation as global activation. It's a very unique state of mind because it occurs when we stop to process ourselves linear in time. And this is where the equation of juggling comes into play, because by creating anti-entropic sequences and using orbital events within those sequences, we distort our linear reference of time, and that distorts the ego. It distorts my sense of intention within that time. And that allows the brain to communicate in a way that it's not able to when I'm conscious and intentional of my position in time. This is also something that makes it massively accessible for everyone, because it means that its benefits or its outcomes are related to its state of mind and not its action. So a person who juggles functionally in a lower level, it might be a lower technical level, they can receive a same proportional benefit as someone who juggles at a high level, because the major growth that we observe is not being caused by the motor control, it's being caused by the state of mind. And this relates juggling to things like yoga and meditation, because we observe the same things. It's how much time we spend engaged in the state of mind, not our skill level, that determines its impacts, which makes juggling even more accessible than the transformation of its actions alone. Cool. So then understanding that juggling is not its action, that it stimulates a very unique state of mind, we now want to deconstruct what are the experiences that we are having that is causing that stimulation. And this is where we introduce the theory of process formations, which is a formula that describes the total possible sequence and outcomes of our binary relationships with space and time. So understanding how we experience juggling, we first have to understand what is the machine that we are using to do that with, right? What is our body? What are the limitations of our body? And we possess bodies with a bilateral nervous system, and they communicate bilaterally as well. So we always have a left side and a right side to space, no matter what. And it's understanding which communications are needed to process the experience of juggling, and then identifying what are the pathways of those communications that allows us to structure a new system of hierarchy in terms of where juggling should begin for developmental purposes and where we should aim to go. And it's not the same that you would think when you look at traditional classical teaching methods. It's sort of, it's not in line with that. So to give an idea, a big summary, the theory gives us 4 formations, 4 relationships that we can form with space and time, which are synchronous lateral, asynchronous lateral, synchronous bilateral, and asynchronous bilateral. And what we're really interested in understanding here with these relationships is what is the processing demand? What are the communication signals? How are the two sides of our brain communicating during this experience? Because that's what's going to create the frequency noise that's going to stimulate the global activation. And in the first example, synchronous lateral, because the objects in the body don't exchange sides, they don't exchange information about the space as much. And because their timing is the same, they can harmonize their timing as well. So it's actually the simplest equation of juggling to process. And it is where I believe the beginning of juggling is. And then you have asynchronous lateral. And in that example, the spatial relationship is still separated, but the timing is divided. So it's causing more bilateral communication signals to occur. In the third example of synchronous bilateral, now the timing is the same. So the timing is simplified, but the spatial relationship is more complex because the objects are changing sides, and the two halves of the hemisphere, the two sides of our brains, need to communicate about that experience. And then in the last example, we have asynchronous bilateral, which is our 3-ball tossing cascade, which currently is the cultural start point of juggling. And it also happens to be the most challenging for us to process, which is, again, why it makes no sense that we start at this location. Because here the person is having to communicate information bilaterally about space and time. So we take our theory of process formations. We start off with this idea. We identify, okay, I have 4 primary relationships that I can form with space and time, and they are synchronous lateral, asynchronous lateral, synchronous bilateral, and asynchronous bilateral. So these are the relationships I can form. Now I need an environment in which to exercise those relationships. And this is where the idea of spatial sequencing maps comes in. So spatial sequencing maps indicate where and when interactions with space will occur, but not the manner in which they must be performed. A total of 5 sequencing points are needed in order to stimulate the total possible spectrum of our binary interactions with space and time. So what a spatial sequencing map attempts to do is it works sort of like, maybe you've seen some dance theories that do this, like where they put footprints on the ground and they put numbers on them. So it's a way to impose onto space like a structure, right? An order that we can interact with and that we can create a notation system for as well, so we can describe those interactions. And it's not required that we use 5 points, but 5 points is what we use in our facilitation methods because it's the minimum amount of points that allows me to sequence and develop all the different stimulations that I'm aiming for. So the entire spectrum of the theory of process formations. You can use 7 points, 8 points, it doesn't matter. If you use an even number, you lose the center line. And the center line is really important when you're facilitating compositions, because a lot of times we're trying to trick people into learning things, and having the ability to have them exchange information in the center before I ask them to cross is really helpful when you're building your teaching models. So the idea is we pick 5 points in space. We want to have 1 in the center and 2 to each side. Most commonly for facilitation, these points are arranged in linear planes for accessibility. However, any arrangements of points is equally imaginable. The key element of construction is to preserve the centerline relationship between left and right, and then to arrange any number of contact points on either side. So it's not limited to one line. In facilitation, we like to do it on the x-axis. The juggle board uses the x-axis primarily, and then also the horizontal. So, but it's important to understand they don't have to all be in one line. They can be anywhere. It's just about creating a relationship with space that has a point in the center and 2 points of interaction on either side. And where they are is up to you. But if you're introducing these ideas, we want to reduce the amount of variables, to reduce the amount of things the person has to process. So we start linear and we develop more abstractly. So some examples of this. In the first example, you see the x-axis, and this is the classical facilitation position where we are interacting with objects along the x-axis and they're moving away from us and towards us. And then in the other example, it's the y-axis. In that situation, the hands are moving up and down. So all contact points are in the center line. but they're going up and down. So in the Z-axis is this we call solo position. This is when you're playing horizontally with the juggle board, but then we can also mix these accesses, so we can have a combination of any amount. So just keep in mind that the spatial sequencing map idea does not apply to any object, and it doesn't necessarily need to be linear, although it is helpful to make them linear when you're facilitating. Propswap is an ordered system of notation that allows us to describe the different sequencing activities of functional juggling in the context of working with spatial sequencing maps. So we want to engage the theory of process formations. We have a spatial sequencing map to understand our structure of interaction. Now we want a notational language that can describe those interactions. It derives its grammatical influence from the classical model of site swap notation, which is the mathematical language of juggling. In general, site swap seeks to calculate the order of its events in time, whereas Propswap acts to identify the locations of its events in space. Also, site swap is actually a mathematical principle. It's not something that was created, it was something that was discovered. And Propswap is invented, it's fabricated. It's just a notational system to help us describe activities. It doesn't have laws. Just to make that clarification for the people who study site swap, like, don't get it confused. Separate thing, it's just inspired, you know, Propswap is inspired by site swap, but it doesn't work the same way. It's intended to create another universal language of juggling that can be shared and described without any additional need for its translation. So having understood the notation system, having understood spatial sequencing maps, having understood the theory of process formations and the relationships that we want to form in order to stimulate the state of mind, which we recognize as being juggling, we are now ready to construct our primary composition. The primary composition is a radically effective means for developing a person's sequencing capacity well beyond what is needed to manage the expression of a 3-ball tossing cascade. So we're taking the goal of saying, okay, if let's say the standard is asynchronous bilateral, the cascade, the sequencing demand of a 3-ball tossing cascade is our goal. We are going to destroy that goal. We're going to bypass it. We're going to do the most complex relationships that we can form, and we're going to do it in a short period of time. And we're going to provide all the foundational capacity a person needs if they choose to want to do that activity. But there's many other ways they can choose to express juggling. They might not necessarily ever have to do a toss juggling cascade. It takes the theory of process formation and applies its transformation to the systematic capacity development of each of its participants' experience. So we're taking the relationships of the theory of process formations and we're now applying them into a development strategy using a 5-point spatial sequencing map. It is intended, but not required, to be facilitated non-verbally and with as little interruption to engagement as possible. The reason we need to deliver it the reason we want to deliver it non-verbally is because of the sort of state of mind that we want to trigger as well, and to encourage the participant to search for their own solutions, to be active in their own learning process. If I communicate instruction, a different part of the brain is activated, and we don't want that, the ego, the self-consciousness becomes activated, and we're trying to avoid that. It also makes it more accessible. If I can deliver something non-verbally, it means I can play with anyone. And in terms of having as little interruption to the engagement as possible, and why we create these compositions is because we are establishing a new communication channel through sensory tactile communication. The forces that we apply to the objects and the rhythm that they create is how we're able to communicate different energies and different intentions, you know, like to go faster, to go slower. We have to construct a rhythm if we want to be able to communicate this way. Emphasis of social and emotional learning experience is critical to the management of successful outcomes. So this also, the primary composition is where I think we really cross the line from just like general functional juggling ideas to very specific Quat props methodologies. Like this is a dance that was studied and created over many years. And it really, if I've seen people use it in a technical way, and I've seen people use it in a social and emotional way. And always the people who are able to understand and use it in a social and emotional way are the ones that have the best learning outcomes. So it's important to understand that anything we, in this sort of facilitation model, anything that we want our participants to experience, we have to be able to embody ourselves. So it's not something we can deliver unless we experience ourselves. Un momento. Por favor, agua. Más agua, por favor. Gracias. My throat is dry. So I'm not going to demonstrate the whole composition for you, but it is explained in the book. And if you understand the notation system, you can follow along now. If you don't know the notation system, it's okay. This is a nice little visual to help you start to gain an understanding of the language. And the composition has three parts. It has a forward position part, an open position part, and a horizontal part. And each step is guiding towards more independence and more complexity. But I'm going to show you just the first part now so you can get an understanding of how it applies the progressions of the theory of process formations. So if you look on the left side of the screen and you see the notation, this is the order of the composition itself. And it works by taking a series of patterns and grouping them by their formation. So I identify a series of hand positionings that I want different relationships with space that I want my participant to experience. And then I begin to condition that behavior with a synchronous lateral formation. Once I've conditioned that relationship with those positions in space, I then encourage the participant to change their relationship with time. And what this does is allows them to process, first to develop a conditioning behavior with the space, and then to develop a relationship with the time. And it's a very effective means of communicating this idea without having to explain it. And then we do synchronous bilateral for this development, and we end with asynchronous bilateral. So just to play for you here, this first video you can watch. And it's playing now. Another thing with the notation is we start off with the notation so we can describe the activity, but then afterwards it's much simpler if you know it, just to refer to it by its pattern number. And the pattern numbers also follow a hierarchy as well in terms of what they're encouraging each person to do. So for here with pattern 3, it has an asymmetric geometry. So we're trying to encourage that reflected symmetry in space. This is a transition beat. These are beats we use only one time just so that we can go from one pattern to another without interrupting the rhythm. It's so important that we don't interrupt the rhythm. So here's another transition beat. This is a video that I took from my training seminar, so it's intended to explain in more detail. And then there's this pattern, pattern 2, we encourage changing of hands on the midline. So the one lane is being activated. And then we transition to asynchronous. So now I'm going to repeat the same structure of patterns, the same relationships to space and in the same order, and I'm only going to change the timing. And then we condition a new behavior. Another transition. And the activity concludes with what we call pattern 5, which is a pattern that requires us to alternate between formations. So this is constantly switching between lateral and bilateral. And every hand has to reach every position. So all the objects are exchanging as well. It's equivalent to what we call Mills mess pattern. So with that pattern, if a person's able to sequence that activity, a 3-ball tossing cascade becomes a much smaller challenge afterwards. And then we do a series of synchronous bilateral, more just to communicate or condition the behavior, because we find that if you try to get someone to cross bilateral asynchronous without conditioning the spatial relationship first, it's really hard for them to get that idea, and because there's a resistance to crossing that midline. So a lot of this composition is based around the psychology of how a person learns as well. I tested the model so many times against different people to figure out like what is the most efficient way to get them from point A to point B. And this is what I came up with. But the technique itself is not enough to guarantee success. In order to guarantee success, we need facilitation techniques. We need a facilitation model. I'm going to talk notational transformation. So as I said before, and just to drive this idea home, that the objects, the props themselves are not the methodology, they're not the theory. It's about the spatial sequencing map and the theory of process formations. And the action that we use to express these relationships is irrelevant. It can be whatever we want. So this is an activity that we do in our seminars when people are first learning to facilitate the primary composition. We have practice activities where you can learn notation just by tapping. And these are games you can play with children as well. You can have social play, you can tap out a group of numbers and you can ask them to copy you. And now what you're doing is different than just random, because now you're doing it with an intention, right? Now you're understanding, okay, these are the 4 relationships I want to condition. Because the more we do them, the more connection we build for these relationships. And it requires a lot of repetition to build this connectivity. So we're always looking for ways now to stimulate these 4 relationships. And now we have this system of play. It's very easy to construct. And we have a notation system that gives us endless material. So notational transformations are the application of spatial sequencing maps in combination with Propswap notation for the purpose of creating new juggling activities. Sequencing maps create the structure of our interactions with space and time, and notational transformations help us to apply the relationships of the theory of process formations to them. This can be thought of in the same way as transitioning from juggling balls to rings to clubs. So when we think of going from balls to rings to club, we don't think about changing the activity, right? I'm still juggling, but I'm learning to juggle with a new object. So that idea of hierarchy now, we can apply going down the opposite direction. We can deconstruct and say, okay, I don't need to roll balls. I don't need to throw. I can make any action I want and I can turn it into juggling. So you could do the primary composition. It doesn't have to be with the juggle board. You don't need a juggle board to do it. You just need 5 objects, preferably objects that move through space, but they don't necessarily need to. So now that we have this system and we understand that the action itself can be transformed, we want to talk about functional integration, how we take these things that started out as juggling games, and how we now use that as a tool for other forms of intervention, for functionality. The formulas required to create juggling can be described by the theory of process formations and the concept of spatial sequencing maps. So it's all laid out for us already. We have this container. The only thing needed to transform their functionality from play into therapeutic intervention is an examination of the where, how, and why we choose to integrate different actions or objects into our existing frameworks. So using this system of play, it becomes effortless to construct and design new variations of it. It's intended to be transformed. But reflecting on why and what we should transform and how we can optimize that is an important conversation to have now. And I think it really it'll be surprising. It surprised me just how expansive these ideas can be. Designing juggling around the personal needs of individual participants makes it a relatively straightforward process. So there's a couple ways we can design juggling now. We can think about its action. I can choose an action that I want. I can decide, okay, I want my thing to include bouncing an object. And I can use that action to then construct an idea of juggling. Or we can do the other way around and we can receive from other people. So if somebody shows me an action that they have, that they're able to perform, say they're not able to throw and catch, I'm going to say, okay, what action can you do? Show me what action you can do. And I can take that action and I can turn it into juggling. So basically, it is only a matter of determining what actions a person is able to produce and then using those actions to create juggling with them. This is why we say everyone can juggle. Juggling is something everyone can do. Transformation can be achieved simply by replacing whatever action we use to sequence our events with any other form of movement. So if you're familiar with the juggle board and you've seen how that works, all you have to do is change the mechanic, change the action, and the formulas and the systems work the same. It's a system of play. It's not one apparatus. So at the bottom, it's structured vertically, and this child on the left, no instruction, no explanation, just a system of play that lends itself to the discovery of juggling. So you don't even need to instruct juggling. If you give someone these arrangements, these systems, they discover it on their own. And on the bottom there is a video from a project we did in Czech Republic, and that is called the domino board. I don't know where it is. I think it's in the UK. Does anybody know where this prop is? Somebody has it. I don't have it. Okay, so to give some examples of functional transformations, so literally any capacity that requires repetition and time on task to be able to develop can be integrated into an activity of functional juggling. This is an approach that begins to highlight the many new directions of cross-disciplinary application, which we are now able to explore through juggling. So if you're working in a therapeutic setting, one of the key objectives is always going to be time on task and repetition. And that sounds like a simple goal, but when you're working with people who are nonverbal, who are different, who have social and emotional issues, getting someone to do the thing you want them to do is not always the easiest, is not always going to be the most productive way to get them to do it, right? I think we as circus people know that, and why we're always building education into play. So this is another idea like that. It's a way to build education into play, so that we can create these systems and we can replace whatever object we're using. So this is an application of a spatial sequencing map, but instead of rolling balls, I'm pushing coins. And I'm applying the different relationships of the theory of process formations, so I know that I'm stimulating this bilateral communication. I'm challenging, or I'm stimulating global activation, or producing at least the foundations for it. So in addition to getting the repetition and the time on task with these activities, we're also able to develop bilateral sequencing capacity in the process. And because of the way we're delivering it as a system of play, we're also developing social and emotional relationships as well. Here is another example where we use markers, and all we're doing is exercising the theory of process formations. Another way you can think about these games is you see in a lot of countries in the schoolyards, children play these clapping games with their hands, where they clap out different rhythms with their hands. It is the same idea. There's a limit. There's the same 4 process formations exist in those games: synchronous, lateral, asynchronous, bilateral. And the children, it's natural for them to want to express these relationships, right? Because they are the total potentials of our body. So these games, they lend themselves very easily to social play. Here's another example where we're using cups of water instead. So I'm same theory, same exact activity, different motor control capacity. What is the functional outcome of this activity now? If now this is an activity that blurs the lines between if it's juggling or if it's therapy, right? Because you're getting time on task and repetition with a functional object. You're having the participant ensure that they can manage that relationship laterally, bilaterally, synchronous, and asynchronous. So you're exceeding what they would need to perform in a real life setting, and you're getting that repetition. Some more examples: it can be anything. Any movement that you can have, you can turn into a game of functional juggling. So I like to focus a lot on like playing with utensils and things like washing, because hygiene, feeding yourself, these are important tasks that many of us take for granted. And especially if you're a caregiver and you live with someone with discapacities, if that person is just able to put food in their mouth, like, so if we can enhance their ability to reach, grasp, and collect, that can make a huge difference in somebody's life. Not just the people that we're directly facilitating for, but also the people around them. So I'm really I always like to try to find ways to have life functional skills built into my activities. And then the other thing, so now I'm going to show you how you can add roll in. So if you don't have a juggle board, anything that rolls, right, is going to provide that same concept. It's not about how we achieve the goal, it's the relationship of the goal. So you can use soda cans and you can apply the theory of process formations this way. And then another example is to use toilet paper, of course. Great solution. If you don't have a juggle board and you're interested in really getting into the theory now, a quick solution I have is if you have 5 diabolos and 5 flower sticks. I don't know, not everyone has those too, but if you work in a circus school, because you can lay the flower sticks on the ground and you can put the diabolos on top of them, so it acts like a track, and you can roll the diabolos pretty straight. Your goal when you're looking for these type of objects is trying to find something that rolls in as much of a straight line as possible, because that's going to reduce the person's errors. So there is something now to talk about, which is the relationship between static and dynamic. So there at the beginning, all the first examples were static. All of those functional examples, most functional examples tend to be static. But then at the end, I showed you the difference with dynamic. It's a basic concept to interact with things that move and to interact with things that don't move. However, I mean, in reality, everything is moving, you know. We are traveling at a tremendous speed right now through the universe, but relative to ourselves, things that move relative to our position in space. Because when we interact with things that move relative to our own position in space, this is how we perceive and process information from space. So to begin with, it is a common thought to assume that the relationships we form with juggling will have something to do with gravity, and this has shaped a lot of our misunderstanding about it. Gravity is not an actual force. It is the curvature of space-time, and as objects travel through it, they carry and absorb sensory information about its existence. Objects at rest do not reflect as much sensory information about their space-time experiences as do objects which remain in motion. Motion through space equates to energy, and energy produces frequency, which is what creates the harmonics of our relationship to juggling. So when we say that we harmonize with juggling, this is what we are harmonizing with. We are harmonizing with space. And the analogy I like to use here is like with the fish. The fish joke is that there's two fish swimming in a pond, and one of the fish says to the other fish, "How's the water?" And the other fish responds, "What is water?" Right? Because it's something that's ubiquitous and it's hard to understand when we are in something like that. And space is one of those things. So the way that we are able to process information from space is by interacting with objects that are in motion, because they carry information about it. It's how we can be sensory aware of its existence. And it makes a huge difference in the stimulation, because when I interact with static objects, this is technically an expression of juggling, but it's not an authentic experience of juggling because it doesn't require me to harmonize with external sensory information. Whereas when I interact with objects that are moving, it does. But understanding this difference is important for helping us to structure our activities, to structure our developmental models, because now we know we can start with static expressions of juggling. We can use those to develop functional capacities, or we can just use them to develop in the sequencing capacities, and then either continue down that path or transition to more dynamic interactions later on. So it really just extends the spectrum of juggling infinitely down. Functional integration. So utilizing the sequencing relationships of the theory of process formations and then incorporating mixed forms of static and dynamic interactions, we are able to increase the expected outcomes for time on task and repetition of any activity. So when you start to mix dynamic and static, like we don't need much dynamic. You need one ball, one object moving back and forth between two people, and you will create this stimulation. It doesn't take much. And this stimulation is going to produce dopamine. It's going to produce a lot of positive impacts. It's going to take the person out of sort of a technical mindset and into a more of a mindset of play, because it's going to trigger rhythm in the person, and people like rhythm. So making the combination, learn how to combine the two is the next level. You start off, I think, is good to just play all static, learn about the relationships, learn about the potential that you have to get people to move in whichever way you want. And then as you get comfortable with that, start to play with dynamic objects as well. But it requires higher level of facilitation, right? Because anything we have our participant experience, we need to be able to manage as well. Also, this structure of play easily lends itself to nonverbal communication strategies, which makes it even more accessible for everyone. It uses a very simple social communication strategy of mirroring, copying, and human beings are designed to copy each other's behaviors. So it's and it combines rhythm with that as well. So you get a really open responsiveness from other people when you play this way. You don't have to explain things. It's the same way you would play with a toddler, and it works for every age group. By replacing the actions of any functional juggling activity with that of something like pouring a cup of water or drawing with crayons, we transform the beneficial outcomes into those of therapeutic and clinical forms of intervention. And this has been my experience as I've traveled and shared this work with different clinical groups. They are always really impressed with how much repetition and how much focus these activities can get. And they're always interested in me explaining that to them. And my explanation is it's because of the flow state. It's because of the way that it allows us to detach from linear time that creates this state of mind, and it creates this ability for people to focus. So what are the implications from a therapeutic standpoint? In terms of time on task and repetition, the outcomes of this form of delivery produces an expected 60 repetitions per minute, because you're getting at least 1 repetition per every second, and you're maintaining a rhythm. So assuming the person doesn't have any other major limitations, you would expect around 60 repetitions per minute. Even half of that would be amazing. So because we engage in a continuous stimulation with the person, we don't have interruption. It can produce 600 repetitions per every 10-minute facilitation, while simultaneously developing bilateral sequencing capacities, stimulating global activation, and enhancing social and emotional communication skills. So now, what in the clinical sector would seem, which is the cherry, on the their objective is time on task and repetition, and with this model, that becomes such a small benefit in terms of comparison to all the other capacity development that we're doing. So we're not just addressing one issue, we are addressing holistically the person's development. And we're kicking the ass. We're exceeding the expected outcomes, the current standards. We're exceeding the current models. It is very important that we recognize the unparalleled benefits and impacts that this type of engagement has to offer. I think is critical that as circus people, as circus facilitators, that you understand that with this tool, it gives us a new status, a new bargaining chip, right? Like, we can now approach clinical groups and therapists and anyone who's working with any sort of physical development, and we can tell them, we can get your participants, we can get your patients to do whatever movement you want a lot of times in a really short period of time, and we can develop all these other systems, all these other capacities with them as well, within a system of play. And I think that is important, that we accept this awareness that we can do this thing, because we can. There's no confusion or doubt over the unique benefits juggling has to offer, but there are some concerns over its perceived levels of accessibility, right? Certainly any school system would be delighted to have their students benefit from juggling. However, since it is not viewed, or has not always been viewed, as being accessible for everyone, it fails to meet the criteria for universal implementation. So in the 5-step juggling model, I talk about this a lot, how like the traditional expected outcomes for teaching someone a 3-ball tossing cascade using the classical model of teaching is less than 40%. And less than 40% is not good enough to be implemented into mainstream education. We need to exceed that goal. We need to be at 100% or at least 80%. And I think functional juggling allows us to fill that gap. So if you are someone who's trying to introduce juggling programs into mainstream education, you can still continue to focus on the toss juggling, because the toss juggling is sort of like the purest, right? It's the highest form of interaction with space, because you're getting all that information. So you can still choose to develop those projects, but you can also show these school systems now, and for the children who don't have the capacity to reach this level right away, I have this offering as well to ensure that everyone is going to get the stimulation. Now we become inclusive, now we become universal, now we can be in mainstream education. Because the thing that stopped us before is the terrible success rate of our teaching model. It is a horrible success rate. So we have this opportunity now. By proving juggling is an accessible activity for everyone, we can now begin to engage all parts of society with whatever level of accessibility that we desire. So I think it starts with education, because we've all been trying to get into that for a long time, but it goes well beyond that now, because we have a lot of interest from universities who are interested in using these tools to do research, to study these tools themselves, to study the impacts of juggling, because now I'm able to get someone who wouldn't traditionally be able to toss juggle to experience juggling. What are the impacts for that? Oftentimes it's the people who have the hardest time to access traditional toss juggling that will benefit the most from it, right? So there's all these new directions, there's all this new interest, and we are not limited with who we can work with anymore. This is the implication. You can work with whoever you want to work with now. This means more people experiencing and benefiting from juggling, which means more jobs and more partnerships. Just to mention a few industries that are huge, much more bigger than circus, right? Early childhood development, clinical rehabilitation, inclusion-based enrichment, mental health intervention. And I think given the recent events, right, of the transformation of society that we've all experienced, I think now more than ever, we understand how important it is that if we want circus to survive, we need circus to evolve. And that means diversify in its audiences, right? So we need to take responsibility for opening new markets so that when rough times hit, and even in the good times, that we're able to survive, right? And the way we do that is by integrating ourselves into every aspect of society, so that we don't get left behind next time, right? Because a lot of us did this time. So moving on, this also means more equipment being produced and sold. So companies are doing well. Those companies support artists, plus more people attending festivals and more shows, tickets being sold, etc. All the impacts of more people juggling is only good. Enhanced executive functioning capacity, ability to better process paradox, and autonomously sort out conflicting pieces of information equals immeasurable effects on society. So one of the beneficial impacts that a lot of academia likes to focus on with juggling is its enhancement of executive functioning capacity, because the frontal lobe of the brain is where we sort of like, is where the consciousness is thought to be, more like the ego, because it takes information from other parts and it solves equations this way. So it's sort of like the chief executive, you know, it's like the one that decides things. It's your decision-making area, right? And juggling really interconnects a lot of information to this region, which helps a person be a better decision maker, I guess. But it's also known for developing imagination. So, and you can look at any study for music, the impacts of music are identical to the impacts of juggling. So, and what we find with these activities is that it increases a person's imagination or creativity. And what do we mean by that? How do we evaluate someone's creativity? One of the ways they do it is by asking them exercises like, okay, name animals right now, a list of animals going through the alphabet. And most people will list pretty predictable animals, and people who play musical instruments will have a more varied list of animals than someone who doesn't play a musical instrument. Or another example of this is to give someone a paperclip and to say you have 2 minutes to write down as many ideas as you can that you can do with this paperclip. And people who don't play musical instruments run out very quickly. People who do play musical instruments, they continue throughout. Oh, I can do this with it. I can do this with it. I can do this with it. So another term for this capacity, or one that is more marketable for us to use, or one that's going to help us make more friends, is if we focus on innovativeness, because imagination is the capacity of innovation as well. For me personally, I think imagination is the capacity of empathy, because in order to have empathy, you need to be able to imagine someone else's experiences. And if we know that juggling is enhancing a person's capacity for imagination, we could also assume it would enhance their capacity for empathy as well. And this is what I would like to see more people have too. So this is the other implications. If we imagine on a broad scale the impacts of this, imagine if we are really in education systems and every child is receiving the impacts of juggling, how would that transform society when those children grew up? Juggling holds the cognitive impacts of art. Art is the power of imagination. Imagination is the capacity of empathy. I also think imagination is the capacity of change, because if we are going to change, we need to be able to imagine a future that is different. So I believe that juggling holds these potentials. I believe juggling is as powerful as music, and we all know how powerful music is. Nobody doubts that, but I'm saying juggling is at the same level. Whew. Okay, now I'm going to give a little bit of background information. I get a lot of background questions in my seminars. I usually make a rule, like no personal questions at the beginning, because I think people are usually really excited about the work that I create. They're so excited and they want to know, where did you come from? How did you figure this out? And I think it's important that it's nice to know these things, but I don't like to focus so much on me as the creator, because for me, it's been such a collective process as well. I feel more like the vehicle for this material than I do the creator of it. And I don't like to focus. I want the concentration to be on the material, not on the person. And I've been very aware of that in my development, especially coming from circus, because we have the entertainment side, the performance side, and most people are trying to consolidate attention. And in this situation, that doesn't benefit my goals. If I consolidate attention, I want to put the attention outward. I want to expand our borders. So I'm going to give you a rare glimpse, a little bit of a background story. Who is Craig Quat? What is Quat Props? And where we're headed. Yeah. So functional juggling was created, to start with everyone, how did it start? Functional juggling was created between somewhere around 2010 and 2011, when I was about 26 years old. It was a reverse design process, meaning I created it experientially before I was able to understand it. So at the beginning, I was just working with people who were different and had different capacities and trying to share juggling with them. And it was through experience and play that we came up with these solutions. And then afterwards, everyone was like, wow, this is great. Can you share and explain this? And I was like, I'm going to need a couple years to figure this out. And I went back and I started to study neuroscience and astrophysics and all the things I could to help me understand, to be able to explain to you these theories now about space and time. I did not know that at the beginning. To give you a video, this is a little trailer we made. Early on, I started talking to patent attorneys because I was concerned about, somebody stealing these ideas and stopping other people from having them. And the advice that I got, or the information I got that I needed, was that all I had to do was publish evidence of their existence and then wait 12 months, and then nobody else could control it. So because of the publication of this video, and now this video is, I don't know how many years old, this is what made it open source to begin with. These were all the original props. You can see I was experimenting and exploring so many ideas and just trying to understand, how can I create that sensation of juggling? And then deconstructing what the elements were. That was with a project called BANDofJUGGLERS, which is just sort of another cool story for another time. I have a lot of cool stories. So it took years of cross-disciplinary collaboration and study to be able to consolidate a world of ideas into a streamlined theory that I could explain to others. And it wasn't until around 2016, when I left the US, that I finally felt ready to begin to share it in a more formalized way. It was also around the time that I met Lapo Botteri, who is with us too as well. And he's the collective leader. We'll talk about him a little bit more later. But for me, it's been it's been a crazy journey with a lot of stories. I really feel that the community has contributed a lot to this, and it feels like a shared project to me. I think the European people, now I feel really good with the material, how it's being presented. And we've been to, like, I don't know how many countries now, how many cities, how many circus schools, I have no idea. We've trained hundreds of people and we just keep training more. So something is going right, Yeah. So my personal background, I think a lot of people, I can be a little bit confusing for some people. And I know that there has always been this expectation from the moment I began to share this work. I felt this immediate expectation from society that I needed to be a lot more professional than I was. And I spent a lot of years trying to be that thing and, play in that game. But I don't do that anymore. So to tell you guys the truth, like, I'm not a genius. I'm someone that society refers to as non-neurotypical or neurodivergent human being. So in my first year of education, I was removed from mainstream education and I was placed into an isolated special needs program. And this is like in the early 90s, which is not a good moment to be in special needs programming. And I could remember how painful and confusing it felt, the rejection, and being labeled as someone with special needs, but not having it being explained to me what I did wrong. Because I remember the stigma. There were children that wouldn't play with me because I was part of this classroom. And I remembered the children in this classroom and how I learned to identify with them as my peers. So I lived my life understanding that I am one of these people. This is where I belong. The only reason I got out of that classroom is because I figured out enough that if I could learn to do the minimum of what they wanted me to do, then they wouldn't put me in such situations. Additionally, I'm also a mixed race person who grew up as a first-generation British immigrant outside New York City in the 1980s, and we were pretty poor. So I had a lack of support. I grew up in I would say an abusive environment. So, and I think it's important that I share these two facts about myself, the fact that I'm non-neurotypical and that I grew up sort of in I am the classic example of the people who you would provide social circus to, right? And I was someone who was accepted into a social circus community as a child, and it really had a big impact. So, you know, I've seen both sides of this experience. I have been a benefactor of social circus throughout my life, and now I'm a deliverer of it as well, which is why I have so much respect for the work that all of you do. I believe it was this extreme combination of functional diversity in the face of great adversity, and lack of any like sort of support or structure. I was sort of on my own to figure out what was going on with me. And this is what forced me to develop and experiment with alternative learning models from a very young age, and what allows me to create the things that I do now. So later on in life, I did go to university to study education, but for me, the process of understanding learning began at a very young age. I was forced to for the purpose of survival, to figure out other learning strategies to assist me to function within society. And that burden was pretty hard, and it leads to a lot of resentment. You know, people like me, we can be resentful of society for not being more understanding. And I think the tools that I'm creating now is a way to sort of help build a bridge between these different types of people. People who society puts in to one group, and people who are more free. And I would like my work to represent that. I see myself as a bridge between these two worlds. Meeting circus. So my introduction to circus occurred at age 9 through a unique after-school enrichment program called Juggling Life Inc., which combined the complementary activities of chess and juggling. The program served as a sanctuary for me as a child and helped to keep me connected to the school system during my troublesome teenage years. So like when I say circus saved me, like circus saved me, I'm a classic example of that. And I think it explains a lot of my passion for sharing and supporting the community, because there's nothing I can do to replace circus. Like there's nothing I can do. I will always be grateful for circus. At age 16, I began to volunteer with the program and started traveling locally to deliver events at summer camps for children who were diagnosed with terminally ill diseases. These were some pretty unusual settings to begin teaching. But it was in this context of trying to share juggling with people who were close to death that I first began to question and challenge both its meaning and educational models. So even though I had this exposure to this after school sort of social circus project, we were isolated from the broader circus community. So I didn't know any other model than the one that was being shown to me. And in this particular program, we were working with kids that were terminally ill. So I was being faced with people who were trying to learn to juggle while they were connected to an IV tube. And I was 16 years old and trying to figure out how to teach this person. And it was in this setting, I think that it was really important for me that I was successful, because if I wasn't, then I wasn't going to have another chance. I might not have another chance to teach the person. And then that also triggered a series of questions for me. Well, why is it so important to teach the person if you're not going to see them again anyway? Meaning, like, what is the point for someone to learn how to juggle if they're going to die soon? And for me, there was a point. And it was, I think it was this exposure at a young age that put me on that path. And I wanted to share that part with you, because I think it's important to understand why these ideas weren't discovered before, because they are very obvious. I think now that we have them and we're sharing them, it seems very obvious, these solutions. But just trying to come up with an explanation for people, because they ask me all the time, like, why did you figure this out? And I'm like, well, these are the things I was working with. This is the situation I had. My relationship with juggling. At age 22, I had another meaningful experience with juggling when I used it as a source of self-medication for a period of severe depression. At the time, I was suffering greatly from not being able to exist in the present moment. So most people who are suffering from trauma and depression, it's really hard to be present, because you're constantly having anxiety about things in the past you can't control and things in the future that you're afraid of, right? So juggling presented a gateway in which I could escape the pain of my own body, like just for a moment. Like while I was juggling, I didn't feel the pain because my mind was free, right, from this torment. And that, I think, provided me the space that I needed to begin to rehabilitate. Juggling itself didn't do all the work, but it created a space for me in which I could begin to go to therapy and do other things and actually have a response to those things, instead of just being trapped in this distorted relationship with time. Over time, I noticed how the activity was altering my state of mind in a way that allowed me to better deal with my trauma and regain control over my own emotional processing systems. I had not yet solved the problem. So this is when I began to think about it this way, but I hadn't figured out how to make it accessible. But it was through this personal experience that I had with juggling, where again, it saved me again, that I began to feel this passion, this determination that whatever this thing just gave me to save my life, I want to share that with as many people as I can because it's powerful. So then I created Band of Jugglers. I'm just going to let this play. And we began to explore I was really excited to discover these ideas. I was really happy to be able to share juggling with more people. To give you some idea, another idea of some of the different crazy ideas we play with. And you know, I don't know how loud the volume is. Can you hear me if I talk over? Yeah. So I hope in sharing these videos, you can get a sense too of just how collaborative this process was for me. And the biggest community that I collaborated with is the participants that I was looking to help, right? Because those are the people who know what they need more than anyone. So rather than, I did have worked a lot with doctors to learn things, but ultimately it was my relationships with the people that I was helping directly that taught me the most. I remember this period so well, like, because every day I woke up and my mind was blown. Some other student blew my mind by showing me what was possible that at this moment, I didn't know it was possible. I just put my hands up and I was like, okay, you guys show me what's possible because I have no idea. And we played a lot. Before I go on to the future goals, just to make a comment about that last video is, I believe that, functional juggling is a gateway for us to open doors, but I never at any point in my career felt that functional juggling was a methodology that needed to be practiced in it's a bubble, that it was outside of a social circus project. It enhances a social circus project. So I also work with feathers and plates and, partner acro and all the systems you can. But what I found with these tools and presenting juggling in this way is it opens a door for us. So I was able to get in, with a new project, a clinical center with the juggle board. And then once they got in with that idea, then I was able to bring in all the other elements of circus as well. But I found if I tried to go with social circus at the beginning, if I didn't lead with the juggle board, sometimes it was harder for me to open those doors. And then it was great because they were interested in the juggle board. And then I was able to show these clinical people as well, like, look, social circus has all of this stuff and it can all be inclusive as well. Cool. I'm going to talk about our future goals. Cool. The catalyst, so the goal is to be a catalyst for the development of inclusive circus practice through collaborative creation and sharing of enhanced learning models. So those of you who know, I am very, very open source. I don't want to centralize or control this information. I encourage collaboration. I encourage people to transform ideas, to challenge my ideas. The goal is to always make better. And I don't see myself as being at the center of this conversation anymore. We want to nurture the growth of functional juggling communities through delivery of training seminars, production of open source materials, and personal mentorship of regional leaders, AKA the collective. So I have been on a world tour now for, since 2017. It got a little bit interrupted with the pandemic, but it's planning to continue again in September. I'm going to keep visiting countries. And everywhere I go, I keep developing new members of our community. I keep introducing new people to these methodologies. And even the ideas are starting to spread beyond me now, where people are beginning to play and develop programming with this material without having met me. So we should expect to see a lot more growth in the next 10 years, faster growth. It's increasing the speed of this growth. But in terms of what responsibilities I'm taking right now, I'm focused on training the community, helping to continue to produce open source resource materials that are going to allow people to learn and start to make this transition, and to continue to develop personal leaders in each region that I visit. So the collective is an idea that is trying to, it's more for like management, project management, but basically I make a relationship with at least one person from every major city I go, and we invite them into this community. We're still trying to figure out how we're going to, what we're aiming to do with it, but they become the contact person. So they're the ones who have all the information. They take responsibility when somebody shows interest in functional juggling in that area, to help that person navigate where they can go, or to collaborate with that person. Because I can't keep collaborating with everyone. I would love to, but I'm only one person and it's hard. So we're building network, we're building infrastructure. The project has visited over 20 countries and delivered hundreds of training seminars in cities across North America, South America, Europe, and Africa, just in the last 5 years alone. So even though I started this in 2010, I was a little bit resistant to taking responsibility for it. But now that I have, it's really been taken off. And just to give you a sense, like, we're just beginning, you know, like this is the beginning. You guys are here for the start. The objective is to decentralize the tools and information which allow juggling to be shared inclusively. In doing so, we produce a wave of independent communities, all pushing and collaborating for the same goals, a more equal world, right? We're all in this together. We all have the same goals. I encourage you to use these methodologies as a platform for you to begin to practice and open new opportunities for yourself. But I don't expect anyone to mimic it in that sense. Like, it's not intended to be institutionalized. You know, we do have training certificates in our programs, but it's more just to sort of create a quality control, to say, okay, everyone with this document, it means we have a shared knowledge base. That's all that it means. So I'm really focused on building community. To give you more information about what the collective is, because this is sort of a weird idea, we're still trying to figure it out as well. But I've got this network of people that I'm interacting with, and I want them to interact with each other more because they have knowledge. They're all developing their own knowledge bases now. And my goal is to get them to have a way to interact and share this knowledge base and to grow. Partnership helps in circus. The one thing I've learned from traveling and seeing circus is whenever you have network, you have growth. If you can get circus schools to come together and cooperate, you have growth. That is a law of circus. So it's a cooperative base of practitioners dedicated to the goal of dissemination and development of functional juggling ideas and cultures. So there are 2 people, I think we have 16 representatives so far, 16 people in this community spread out over 11 countries and 2 continents: Italy, Spain, Hungary, Czech Republic, Poland, Germany, United Kingdom, Mexico, Costa Rica, Chile, and Argentina. And what I did with Lapo Buteri and Josefa Escandra is I spent a lot more time with them. We have much closer personal relationships. Lapo let me live on his couch for 3 months, and I woke him up every morning with writing on his wall and screaming at him about Propswap Notation. So he's someone who really understands functional juggling like inside and out. So I mentored him more, and I mentored Josefa more, and they have taken on the responsibility to continue to mentor the communities as well. So they become leaders and organizers of this community. And again, we are still in the process of figuring out exactly how we are going to organize our projects with this. The other thing about the collective is I don't want people to feel like it's not something you apply for. Like, it's not something we're doing to create status or control. It's something we're doing to be able to disseminate information. So it depends where you are. If you're in a region that we need more help to help develop, then yeah, we would invite you into this community. But we can't invite everyone because we're trying to keep the conversation focused and allow the people who are really practicing the most right now to get their information together so that they can share it with more people. So I'm really important for me not to create barriers or make people feel like they're being excluded from something, but just understand that the collective, it's not a status, it's a responsibility, and it's selected by the people who are in the positions to help spread the knowledge, right? So we just want to celebrate these people. That's it. And you can learn more about them on the website at the collective. So if you are, wherever country you're in, you can find, there's a map of those guys, and you should contact the one who's closest to you, because these are all people who I found, like, they're amazing people. They're all amazing people, and they're doing beautiful projects, and they're open, and they share this same open source value as we do. obviously, because they participate in this system. So getting involved, the best way to get involved is start practicing and sharing. No one needs permission to experiment and explore. Organize and or attend training seminars. Online programs are available this year. Future availability will be in Europe, Latin America up until 2023. And then I'm hoping to get to Australia by 2024. You can share the book with colleagues and friends. You can take initiative to fill in market gaps and grow new sectors. So for example, Jamie and Gina are here. They have a project called Sticklins where they develop sort of inclusive sensory props, and they figured out a way to design the juggle board three-dimensionally with 3D printing. And now they're able to offer that service because they saw that there was that need. So you can be like those guys if you wanted to. And it's sticklings.com if someone wants to write that. Jamie, could you write that in the chat for people? He'll write the website there. It's a really beautiful design. I know he's working on the pricing to try to keep it affordable, but he also offers the file for free. So if you can use the file to print yourself. So you can do things like this. Mark Bielert is another member of the collective. He's doing the same thing. He's creating CNC files. So there's tons of places you can look at this, say, what is functional juggling and where does it need to go? You don't have to wait for our permission. You can take those steps. If you're someone interested in using it in research, contact, if you need help, you can contact me and I will direct you to the person who can help you. And it's all about growth. It's all about sharing. The online seminars, if you are interested, they have filled up quite fast. I think I have space to organize maybe 2 more privately, but I think it's better for me now to focus on hosting some public ones. So I tried to organize 2 of those with one. They'll be probably both be weekdays. One will be a morning time and one will be an evening, just to give people those options. Because I know there's people that really want to take that training. So I'm going to try to be offering that soon. So stay tuned. You can form new partnerships with increasingly diverse populations. So another way, get involved, start doing it, and don't just go out there. Find a group of people that you wouldn't have been able to work with before and start working with them now and learn that way. This is how I learned, right? This is how I experienced it. It should be a personal process for you as well. No formal process for joining the collective exists. However, members are selected from our community. So the best way, if you want to be part of this, if you're really someone who really wants to study and learn more and contribute, really being part of the collective means you're taking responsibility to contribute. The best way to get involved in that is to start to do and share. And that's how you get involved. If you want to support the project, we do have a Patreon campaign. This is a huge help, patreon.com. But I think you guys I'm not really targeting you guys with this, but if you were someone who you had a couple dollars a month you wanted to share, that helps. It really does. And I do have future project goals as well, where it's going to really come into hand, matter more. So you'll see me doing more promotion for Patreon, I think around September. Booking of online training seminars this year are another way to support the project. Continue to develop local and spread local practice while also generating needed funds to plan the next big step of the project development. So these seminars, like I said, I think at most I can take 2 more private this year, and they're priced really affordably because I'm really just using it as like a fundraiser because we're buying a van. We decided there's 4 of us, we're buying a van, and the next phase of the project is going to be collaborative with a person from Spain, Miguel Manzano. He's the editor and illustrator of the Spanish version. And we're going to be doing a project trying to document what's going on here as well. In addition to delivering functional juggling, we're also going to try to do a documentation project to help the world understand how much circus is happening in Latin America. If you want to do a seminar, you should email me and we can talk about it. I can't make promises at this point. I made this presentation before I booked all these seminars. So you can follow and share our posts on social media to help promote and make people more aware of the changes that are taking place within our culture. So the best thing you can do to get involved is to do and to not wait for permission, and to connect, to do and to connect with community. Find people who are doing around you. If there doesn't exist yet, be that person who shares it, right? Conclusion. This is some text taken right from the book, and I'm going to conclude with it as well. So, in absolute honesty and truth, I do not feel responsible for the creation of any of my ideas, although they do technically come from my mind. The body of work presented here represents a decade of traveling and collaborating with communities of artists, educators, and free thinkers from around the world. There is no way that I could have ever imagined all of this material on my own, and I wouldn't have been able to share it that way either. I would love to thank everyone who has participated in this journey with me and humbly dedicate the accomplishments of functional juggling to all of the inspiring people whom I've ever had the honor to call my friends. So again, I would like to conclude by thanking all of you because it is you who is going to change inclusion for everyone else. And also having shared my personal background with you now, you understand how much respect I have for everyone. Anyone who practices social circus, anyone who uses his circus as a tool to help anyone, because I'm someone who's benefited tremendously from that. Like I could not do what I do if I didn't have the support of circus. And I want to just make that really clear as I end my presentation. So thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoyed. We'll take a quick pause. I'm going to pass it off to Veronika, drink some water, and then we'll do a Q&A. So cheers.
Thank you, Craig, for your presentation. I think we just couldn't imagine a better thing for the World Circus Day than this webinar today. So yeah, after that, all of you can do some juggling and other saltos and whatever circus is for you. So yes, this is officially the end of the presentation. And before the Q&A, I would love to close this part, and I would love to remind you that we're gonna have from the end of May, we're gonna have other webinars with the participation of LAPO and the experts of Circaon and the Hungarian Juggling Association. So we keep you informed about that and hope that you will come to those webinars as well. So thanks a lot for today, and then let's start the Q&A after. Thank you.